There was a time we trusted words, believed they mattered, believed they stirred something deeper than the noise, something human in the choice to sit, to listen, to disagree, and still walk out with dignity. But lately truth feels paper thin, drowned out by the fights we're in. We're tired of shouting through a screen, of being told what we should mean. We're longing for a different way, a braver kind of place to stay. Spotlights and a barbarous speaker series calls us back to what could be, where hard thoughts live and questions breathe, and minds are free to truly see. Spotlights and a barbarous speaker series, a light for our community.
As you may know, Jeff and I started Spotlight Santa Barbara to reinvigorate intellectual curiosity, civil discourse, and civic engagement in our community. Without these cultural characteristics, which we call the 3 C's, it's pretty difficult to imagine the United States becoming the greatest nation in the world and celebrating its 250th anniversary, which we just did 3 weeks ago. But today, each of these pillars of a vibrant, pluralistic, responsive republic is in decline across the United States and here in California. As the Harvard Political Review has pointed out, people now label information that conflicts with their point of view as misinformation or fake news. Instead of being curious, and I'm quoting, they dismiss any opposing views as willfully ignorant or even malicious, unwittingly becoming more ignorant themselves. The historian Neil Ferguson, who was just in Santa Barbara last year, has recently warned us all that as AI permeates social networks, curiosity about the past and what it means for the future has been replaced by a kind of anti-history that is spreading like a cancer across the United States. Now, he was writing about Holocaust denial, but this lack of curiosity or willful ignorance has also opened the door to overly romanticized views of the 1950s and socialism. So today, declining intellectual curiosity means that we are at risk of splintering into a society of separate silos or bubbles, rooted in ignorance, indifference, or even intolerance. And sadly, our political parties are increasing this risk with their rhetoric. According to a recent Pew poll, a substantial majority in each political party now describes those in the other party, and this is a direct quote, as more closed-minded, dishonest, immoral, and unintelligent than other Americans. It should come as no surprise then that officials from our opposing parties have ditched debate in favor of barbs ghost-written by Triumph the insult comic dog. President Trump refers to Governor Newsom as new scum, and our governor, in reply on X, has taken to calling the president a brain-dead moron. For a long time, historians knew that Nero wasn't actually fiddling when Rome burned. But what they recently discovered was that he was in fact busy on social media insulting his political opponents. Thankfully tonight, California and Santa Barbara are not literally burning, but we do have other big problems. And one of the biggest is not a policy problem, it's a cultural one, and that's apathy. We just had one of the most important gubernatorial elections in recent memory here in California. Voter turnout was 40%. I call it voter tune-out. With voting by mail, what this means is that for 4 straight weeks, literally 24 hours a day, 7 days a week, 60% of our registered voters consciously decided that they would rather do anything else. Mow the lawn, wash the dishes, fix the antenna on the roof, than spend 10 minutes filling out their ballot and mailing it in. Jeff and I believe we can do better here in Santa Barbara. And that's why we've created this forum, a place where people can come together as a community to listen to different points of view, discuss them civilly, and then find ways to work together to strengthen our community. We did it in February with Dan Walters, and I'm confident that we're going to do it again tonight. Now, we have a lot of ground to cover this evening. We face enormous challenges in California, and many of the problems are even more magnified here in Santa Barbara. The good news, as you'll hear from our panelists, is that there are reasonable and sensible solutions for our most pressing problems. But as Dan Walters noted when he was here in February, this is just the first step, identifying solutions. We must also strengthen informed civic engagement in our communities so that our elected officials are incentivized to be problem solvers instead of just kicking the can down the road, as Dan described as well. And so this is where all of you come in. Our effort to reinvigorate the public square here in Santa Barbara starts with you. We hope that you'll hear something tonight that inspires you to get even more engaged in solving the biggest problems that are facing our community. So thank you for being a part of our effort to provoke thought and inspire change. I'm very grateful to have all of you here with us tonight. Thank you. I need to thank a few more organizations and people as well. We are grateful to our newest sponsors, Montecito Bank and Trust, Village Properties, the Santa Barbara Foundation, and the Pepperdine School of Public Policy for supporting tonight's event. Without their generosity, we would not be here tonight. The same is true for our earliest sponsors, the South Coast Chamber of Commerce, American Riviera Bank, Nicholson and Schwartz, and Pence Vineyards, who also supplied the wine tonight. Thank you, Pence Vineyards, for that as well. But without their early support, there would not be a Spotlight Santa Barbara. There would also not be a series without a venue, and we are thrilled to be back here at the Lobero. This is an amazing theater, and I have to say, the staff here are just incredible. And speaking of incredible partners, we are grateful to have Bill Macfadyen and the entire Noozhawk team not only sponsoring the speaker series, but helping us promote it and produce it as well. We could not do any of this without them, so we are enormously thankful to Noozhawk. Please join me in a round of applause for all our wonderful sponsors. All right, just a minute, I'm going to ask Bill to say a few words, introduce our panelists, and moderate what I know is going to be a very entertaining and informative discussion. But before he takes the reins, I should explain about how the rest of the evening is going to unfold. In a departure from our first event, Bill's not going to take live questions from the audience during the panel discussion. With 4 panelists in about 80 minutes, we don't have time to integrate live questions into the event. But if we don't get to a question that you submitted in advance, or you have a question that comes up during the panel tonight, do not despair. You'll have an opportunity to ask it afterwards on the Esplanade. When we're done here, the bar is going to reopen and our panelists are going to join us on the Esplanade, and they're going to make themselves available to answer whatever questions you have. So I hope you take advantage of that opportunity. Please join us if you can. I'll see you again at the end of the evening to say a few words in conclusion and go over our October 8th and November 17th events. They're going to be spectacular, so I hope you'll stick around to hear what we have coming. It's going to be a phenomenal finish to the year. But for now, enjoy your evening and welcome Bill Macfadyen.
Thank you, Brian, and thank you to all of you who came out tonight for this very important Spotlight Santa Barbara Forum. Many of you, a lot more of you, attended our February kickoff with CalMatters columnist Dan Walters. I've been reading Dan's columns for most of my career, which is a diplomatic way of admitting I'm old. But Dan outlined a half dozen or so crucial issues confronting California, and for the next Spotlight installment, we're going to localize several of them. To be honest, we can't do anything about what California does or doesn't do. I'm an optimist, but even I'm starting to suspect our once golden state may be beyond repair. Locally, however, no matter how dire things may seem, and readers of my weekly Best of Bill columns certainly know I have a few thoughts on some of those things, we do have it within our power to make some changes or course corrections. In our community, we have the intellectual, innovational, and I'm not sure if that's a word, but I'm going to claim it as my own, and the financial capital to do anything. We just have to come up with a plan and mobilize. So that is precisely what you called for overwhelmingly in our post-Dan Walters surveys earlier this year. You wanted more of this. So that's what we're doing tonight. If you find it inspiring and or useful, We're also asking you for your financial investment so we can keep this series going and growing. Support our sponsors, whose names you're seeing up there on the screen, and support Spotlight Santa Barbara. Together, we will make a difference. Speaking of difference makers, let's meet our panelists. I'm a copy editor by trade, so I have to do everything alphabetically. First, KRISTEN Miller is the president and CEO of the Santa Barbara South Coast Chamber of Commerce. She's been leading the way on economic development, workforce housing, and other public policy issues for more than 25 years. She and the Chamber represent 800 members and 75,000 local jobs from Carpinteria to Goleta. Next, distinguished UCLA economics professor Lee OHANIAN. Lee has a unique perspective as a macroeconomic specialist and as a local Montecito resident. He is widely published as an authority on housing, infrastructure, and education, and also a frequent visitor for the UCSB Economic Forecast Project. Pete Peterson is Dean of Pepperdine University School of Public Policy. I'm sure he's heard that before, but that's a lot of P's. But Pete's been working on public policy reform for decades now. In fact, little known fact, KRISTEN, and I were once part of a group called Common Sense California, a nonpartisan, transpartisan organization that was far too oxymoronic to work. But that's a story for another time. Now he and Pepperdine work closely with municipal governments and agencies throughout California and right here in Santa Barbara County. They work on policy development and civic engagement, among other things. Finally, Ashley SWEARINGEN. Ashley is the president and CEO of the Fresno-based Central Valley Community Foundation, but she also is a former two-term mayor of Fresno, who stabilized the city's precarious financial position, revitalized the downtown and urban core, improved distressed neighborhoods, addressed chronic homelessness, promoted local business, and secured a long-term water supply. Does any of that sound familiar here? Yeah, I didn't think so. Okay, let's get started. As a housekeeping note, Brian mentioned this before, but all of our panelists will be on the Esplanade after the forum for about an hour of Q&A, and until it's time for us to go home so I can write my column. So Lee, let's dive right in. We know the California economy is huge. It's the one thing Gavin Newsom can reliably point to as a positive. But is our economy healthy?
Well, before I address that, I hope everybody got liquored up on the Esplanade prior to coming in here. The California economy is remarkable, but it's an economy that's sailing very significantly on the past successes of innovations and investments that were made in the 1950s, 60s, 70s, 80s, and 90s. It's an economy that more recently is one that's struggling to continue to grow. So to give you an idea of that, today, relative to just prior to COVID, February 2020, we've lost over 250,000 private sector jobs in the state. Along with those losses, we've also seen departures of business headquarters of Hewlett-Packard Enterprises, Oracle, Tesla, SpaceX, Charles Schwab. We've lost some transformational entrepreneurs, people including Travis Kalanick, who is the founder of Uber, Sergey Brin and Larry Page, co-founders of Google, Peter Thiel, co-founder of PayPal. So those are trends that are just very, very worrisome for California. And it's not just in terms of private sector job creation. We also have, some of the highest housing costs in the country. We have significant problems of homelessness. We spend substantially on K through 12 education, yet our kids are not performing at the level that we would like them to see. For example, only about 3 out of 10 of our kids are proficient at either math or English. And these are the people that are going to inherit to run the state down the road. And to put this into context, we have a budget that's grown by about 75% over the last 8 years. And if you look back in time when California was growing, 1940 to 1970, the state nearly tripled in size. Its budget, inflation adjusted on a per person basis, was only 1/7 as large as it is today. And yet, at that time, California found a way to build hospitals and schools and roads and electrical infrastructure and water conveyance. So there's an awful lot that's wonderful about California, but there's an awful lot that we can also do to fix it.
So on that bright note, KRISTEN, how do the weaknesses in the California economy that Lee just talked about manifest themselves here in Santa Barbara County?
Well, the thing is, everything you just described is the same here, only amplified. Our highs are higher, but our lows are lower. Everything that are the barriers to business for California: access to a qualified workforce, housing for that workforce, overregulation. We have those same barriers here, but they're even stronger or they're even worse. The numbers go exponentially in our little corner of the woods. California is known for underbuilding, and here on the Santa Barbara South Coast, it's even worse. I have a couple of numbers here. According to the Chamber's own data dashboard that we published for last year, total building permits in Carpinteria were 20, Goleta was 238, and Santa Barbara was 61. We have these world-class assets but we've made it too difficult for businesses to hire. We've made it too difficult to build homes and too difficult to grow our businesses.
So that's a challenge, and that was magnified in Fresno, obviously, for other reasons. But Ashley, you inherited a really difficult situation in Fresno when you were first elected mayor. To what extent were those circumstances similar to what Santa Barbara or what KRISTEN just described? And what were you able to do, and how did you actually navigate that?
I think the only thing that's similar between Fresno and Santa Barbara is the fact that it was like 95 when I left Fresno today, and it was about that. Here in Santa Barbara, what is going on? I'm like, got the call, would you come to Santa Barbara in July? I said yes. Well, it's for this panel. I said yes, because this is kind of God's most perfect place, and it's great to be here. So thank you for having me. Let me just kind of reflect a little bit first on what I've just heard my colleagues up here say, and then, I absolutely want to unpack the things we've lived through, worked through, learned. If there's anything that can help shortcut this community's learning journey from our experience in Fresno, I'm all about it. But when I hear Dr. OHANIAN talk about just the broad brush, it really resonates with me. And it has felt to me for a long time, like working at the local level, which, by the way, just quickly background, I'm like 28 years into working in Fresno Community Economic Development, California's broader Central Valley. So like, that's a long time. And during that whole time, it has felt to me like folks who are in charge of things in Sacramento are living off the fumes in the gas tank, or I guess we would say EV charge, whatever. I don't know. And, it seems so clear, and it really, really concerns me. And when I think about maybe California's golden age that we're still living off of, when I think about where California was back then in the 40s, 50s, and 60s, and when I think about what it is today, there is absolutely no way that we should be thinking our state could pull off a similar sort of approach. It is just too hard and too complicated. We have 40 million people here now. So I would say, as I think about this conversation tonight, things we're going to talk about, To me, it's like, yeah. See the big, see the state, but then as quickly as possible, sort of flip your mind down into the regional economy, because we all know that our economies are way outside the boundaries of our local communities, right? And you just have to stop and think, who has jurisdiction over what? And your regional economy, your kind of like your commute shed, is going to hover around maybe a 3 or 4 county area, and then your placemaking, your housing, your, what's going on for everybody's day-to-day life, that is going to be more of your local city issue, right? So anyway, back to the top of the trailhead, and to respond to your question, kind of what have we experienced in Fresno? I really do feel like it's George Costanza opposite day in Fresno relative to Santa Barbara. Nonetheless, the challenges, I mean, it's all relative. So when I stepped in as mayor, it was the Great Recession. And at that time, and we'll talk a lot about this, I won't go on too much longer here with this response, but we've all talked and kind of thinking about tonight that a really big part of the challenge we all face at the local and community level is getting in touch with what's really real and on the ground, and whether or not we're okay with the conditions we're experiencing in that status quo. So for Fresno, that status quo is chronic economic distress. There is not a way that you can look in your rearview mirror and be like, 10 years ago, it was fine, or 20 years ago, or when UCSB was this, like that is not true in Fresno. So our status quo is chronic levels of economic distress, high levels of poverty, segregated, and hear me say this is a huge challenge, 110 square mile city, segregated more by race and place than any other large city in the United States. And our government systems and our polite society and sort of civic business crowd being like, hey, like we just got to go harder. We got to do, kind of keep doing what we've been doing. And what we had been doing had not produced any results other than what I just described. So anyway, at the same time, when I was serving as mayor, it was the Great Recession. We went through 5 years of very intense budget cuts. We'll talk about that more in just a minute. But all this to say, I think probably tonight when I want to contribute to this conversation is like sort of what is the zoom out to the regional? What is the laser focus to the neighborhood level that you can influence today? And there's no, like Sacramento cannot stop you from making your community what you want it to be. And so we'll kind of toggle back and forth with different solutions and ideas and things we work through. And I completely forgot what you asked me. So I think I should stop talking.
I did too.
Is what I think that means. I don't know what you asked me. Well, whatever. Okay.
But as I often do in these situations, I'm going to ask Pete to get me out of it.
Me too.
So
I've learned that. I've learned that myself.
So we do like the fact that, ignore Sacramento. I think all of us would agree.
We are all in agreement.
Yeah.
That is probably the most important, and pardon me for going on, and I know this is bad panel etiquette, and I promise not to do it again, but last indulgent comment is this. When you live in Fresno, California, you have never experienced your state or federal government working for you. Never. That has never been true. That kind of stinks. But you know what it produces in you? This belief, no one's coming to save us. It's what we can do ourselves. And that actually is a beautiful entrepreneurial characteristic that we have in our community. That is what fuels our progress.
I do like that. So, Pete, you and Pepperdine spend a lot of time working with local governments on civic engagement and policy development. So what are options and tools that our local governments here already have at their disposal, maybe aren't using to the best of their ability? And what are some other examples around the state that you found that could speak to some of these issues that we're grappling with?
Yeah, so you and I have worked on some of these processes through we have a Davenport Institute for Public Engagement at the Policy School that consults with, trains local government officials in how to do something they're not very good at, which is engaging residents in making very tough decisions. Now, there are a myriad different processes, and there are an increasing number of new technologies. I knew in prep for this, I looked at both the city of Santa Barbara and the county of Santa Barbara. Both have their budgets up on an online platform called OpenGov. It's a company I'm familiar with, but it's a really helpful civic education platform in that if you haven't been on either your city or county's budget website, these
platforms are a great way to learn where your tax money is coming from, where it's going to put it in 5 and 10-year horizons. So a number of ways to do that. I'm not here. There's no Ginsu knives behind me. I'm not selling a particular process. But one thing I did want to say, just kind of drafting off of my friend Ashley. So I have worked all over the state on public budgeting processes, from Eureka, California down to San Diego. And one of the first projects I worked on was right after, or in the kind of the wake of the Great Recession. And we got a call from the mayor of Salinas, California, Dennis Donahue, who said, I hear you guys are consulting with cities and how to do public engagement. We got a $20 million deficit on a $100 million general fund. Would you come? And we did. And over the course of several months, we conducted and hosted a number of facilitated workshops around the city of Salinas. And the first one we did was hosted in the community college, had a turnout of about 150 people. And at the end of this process, which involved what was called budget visioning, it was a way of taking very complex budget data and say, you can make these decisions from a policy perspective, either revenue raising or service reductions. And this is what Salinas is going to look like in 5 years. What's the vision that you want for your city? Because I think one of the hardest things for community members to do when you're wrestling around public policy decisions is to get out of the now and to understand the decisions you're making now are deeply going to impact what Santa Barbara looks like 5, 10, and 15 years from now. So we finished the process, right? This first workshop that we did. And the facilitator asked, so what was this like? And let's get some feedback from the public. And I'll never forget, a woman stood up and said, this was great. I got to meet my neighbors, got to learn a lot about the city budget. I didn't know how bad things were until I got here tonight. I felt like my voice was heard and kind of feeding back what I would do. But really, in the end, all I care about, and she spoke directly to the mayor who was standing right next to me, I just want a Salinas my daughter, after she graduates high school, can come back to. Now, I elbowed Dennis in the gut. I said, did you hear that? He goes, yeah, she wants her daughter to come back and live. I said, that's the whole public policy thing. How many people here have their kids living within 100 miles of them right now? Okay. How many of you would like your kids to live within 100 miles of you right now?
But not my wife. She doesn't.
Now, this is the thing about the kinds of conversations the conversation we're going to have here tonight is who's going to get a chance to live here 10, 15, and 20 years from now. And one of the great challenges for all public engagement around budgets, which can get so technocratic and so quantitative and numbers driven, is in the end, really what we're asking is, I want a city where my kids can come back and live. And so thinking about public engagement around even the most difficult policy, even the most complex policy questions like budgets, like land use, like economic development, we should never lose sight that in the end, we're asking a much, as the kids say, a meta question, which is who gets to live here in the future after I'm gone? My father-in-law passed away this past weekend, 92 years old, born and raised in California. And the stories that he told, just like Ashley was saying about what California was, he was a graduate, he was graduating class 1951 at Santa Monica High School, met his wife there, who's married to for 70 plus years, went down to Orange County. And I just can't believe that world existed. And in so many ways, decisions that were made even 15, 20 years ago are directly impacting whether it's public safety or budgets or land use, whether his kids or grandkids are going to get a chance to live in California. So I hope as we talk about even some kind of difficult or challenging, in some ways complex issues, that we never lose sight of the fact that really the reason you're all here is to say, how can we keep this beautiful place beautiful, but not just for me, but for the future? And that future requires change, and change management is the most difficult thing for a community to do.
Well said. Thank you. So we're going to move on to public finances. And Ashley, for those of you who don't know, Ashley ran for state controller a few years ago. Probably wouldn't be able to have her here tonight if she had won. But anyway, California's budget back then was a lot healthier than it is today. What are the biggest challenges that you see within the state budget today and how they affect a local economy, whether it's in Fresno or Santa Barbara County?
Yeah. Well, when prepping for this panel and when this question came up, I was like, I didn't get elected, so I probably am not the person to answer this question. Like, the voters didn't think I should be the one managing the state's checkbook, which is totally fine. But, look, I mean, obviously, the shoe is about to drop in a very scary way. I think, I kind of raised my eyebrow when you said, it's a lot worse off now than it was back when Pete and I were both on the ticket in 2014. I don't know. I mean, it was pretty rough back then. The state was issuing IOUs. It felt very apocalyptic. I don't really know what all we're going to face in the next 2 years, 3 years, 4 years, 5 years. We're going to see the implications of HR 1. We're going to see the implications of the spending spree that we have been on. And, I work a lot with folks in Sacramento at the agency level and various civil, just whatever. I mean, it's almost like no one's talking about it. It's just kind of this weird, eerie silence. But I think we're all aware that there's been such a glut of money in the system, and we're about to experience the exact opposite of that. So I just feel like there's like a dull kind of like everyone is shut down and even considering it. I feel like kind of bringing it back to a local, what matters for you in the room, what matters for your local communities. I would say, obviously, we rely on our state government to fund our public education. We rely on our state government to fund, major infrastructure, our highway system, water systems, et cetera. But so much of what I think you guys are probably wrestling with, just based on what we've been talking leading up to tonight, I wouldn't get too terribly distracted by the state budget crisis that's about to happen. I would stay very focused on your local issues and your local budget. And just keep in mind, again, our governments provide a platform, but the economy itself is so much broader than how many police officers we're going to have, how many sidewalks can we fix? There's so much more to this in terms of making our communities places where we want our kids to be able to live than what's happening in one narrow sort of government agency's budget. So while it is absolutely the case that our local public servants who are managing those issues, it's critical that they do it right and well. It's just not the end all be all is maybe what I would say. So what I think we expect from our government is like, don't be ridiculous, right? Like live within your means, cover your operating expenses, do not get in a whole bunch of debt, have some money set aside for your infrastructure and you're like, hey, here's what we want to do to invest in changing the future. But even if you perfectly budgeted, and we all should, there's still so much more to creating the kind of experience and neighborhoods and place and regional. There's so much more to it. So anyway, it's a little bit of a mix of like, see it, it's real, it's gonna be nasty. The county governments have been shafted. That's incredibly challenging. And also, don't be overwhelmed by it because there is still so much that can be done with who you are, where you are, what you have to work with, I guess is the way I would round that out.
In Santa Barbara, we think the sun revolves around Santa Barbara, so we like that answer. But to that end, KRISTEN, our local budgets are not quite as in dire straits as the state budget, but they're smaller. But both Santa Barbara County and the city of Santa Barbara are facing structural budget deficits. The councils and the supervisors have talked about layoffs and tax increases and sales taxes and service reductions, et cetera. So what do you think, from the chamber's perspective, should local governments be working on to change that trajectory in Santa Barbara?
One of the comparisons I'll make back to the big picture of what we're talking about with the state is very, again, similar here in our little island, which is that for many years, our economy just kind of went along. And we had these magical assets like a luxury tourism market and a high technology hub because of UC Santa Barbara and other technology companies that were churning out innovative new ideas and business. And both of these things kind of, and we had thriving downtowns, and all three of these things began to falter. And I think we were very caught off guard here that like, wait, what is happening? And government officials as well as businesses would say to me and come to chamber meetings and say, hey, this isn't working the way it used to. What do we do? And as you've seen, our governments are struggling with downtowns. They're starting to think about economic development. But the mindset shift that we think really has to happen next is to think about revenue. And it's kind of weird here because it's almost like Santa Barbara people don't want, we have this aversion to talking about money or thinking about money. It's almost embarrassing if we have too much money. And so it puts our governments in an odd position of chasing culture with money instead of having the governments provide the resources that then allow us to express our values through our culture. It's a little upside down. The good news is I do feel that it is shifting. Pete said something to me earlier backstage about, the pain has to get bad enough for people to change. And I'm starting to think on the South Coast it might be getting bad enough because all three cities are talking to us about economic development programs. And they are asking us, hey, what do other cities do? And are there any safe ways we can try this? We're tentative. We're a little nervous to try something new. But there's perhaps an understanding that what we've done up to now has gotten us where we are, and we must change to something different.
Can I ask just a follow-up question, Bill? Okay, because I'm so curious about this. What do you hear from businesses? Like, they're coming to you saying like, hey, it's not really working. What are they saying that they most want to see that's going to directly impact and benefit their business? Or maybe it's not even that.
They're crystal clear. When I moved here from the East Coast, I didn't understand why everyone was so obsessed with government. Like, why are we paying so much attention to Sacramento and to city council? And then I lived here a year or two and found out why. So mostly what they're saying to me is the same top three barriers to business that I just listed. They have got to have access to a qualified workforce. They'll create the jobs. We trail the state in business activity, but we do grow, but we can't fill open positions in our most lucrative industries. Yeah. Then they say, and we need housing for that workforce. And they say, if government would just get out of the way, the market could provide the housing that we need for our workforce. The third piece is overregulation, and we might come back to that in another piece. But I want to highlight one more bright spot. Again, I'm going to shout out to our city manager, Kelly McAdoo, who is leading a staff now with exercises and direction to think about revenue, to change the mindset that we should be generating revenue for important activities that we provide in the city, and that we should interact with business and find out what they need to do more of what they do so that we gain more revenue. And she has a program called Pathways to Yes. This is a mind shift for us because for the past 40 years, I think our highest value has been finding ways to say no. Thank you, Kelly.
Okay, so Lee, what would you add to the to-do list for local governments to improve the public finances other than regulatory reform and in these pathways to yes?
Well, public budgets are just a huge issue. I mean, for the state and also for local government. I mentioned earlier that at the state level, the budget is increased by 75% in 8 years. And that just tells me that the state budget needs to take an Ozempic shot or two. So when we talk about what in terms of what should the state do, I mean, I think they really realistically they should have close to a budget freeze. They won't, of course, but you simply just it's not fiscally sustainable to increase the budget at that level. California has lost population in those 8 years, and states such as Texas and Florida, which have been rapidly gaining population, their budgets aren't up anything close to that, probably about half. Locally, I think there's a lot of opportunities to increase revenue without necessarily making it more difficult on taxpayers. I worry about downtown and State Street. Tax revenue from downtown, inflation adjusted, is down about 20% since prior to the pandemic, whereas revenue from Coast Village Road and from the harbor is up over that period. So I think there's some good economic reasons to perhaps consider reopening State Street. I've been teaching economics for like I've never gotten applause like that in all those years. And there's also public safety reasons as well. I mean, there's been nine properties on State Street have received property tax reductions because of decline in business, and businesses just off State Street are struggling. So I think makes good economic sense to reopen State Street. There are areas where we have, to put it politely, some somewhat older businesses that may be sitting on land that's not used as valuably as it could be. And when we look at the really transformative businesses that have come to the area, businesses like Deckers and Yardi and Umbra, extremely productive, innovative businesses that are attracting a lot of talent to come to Santa Barbara. There's no reason why we can't move Santa Barbara forward with newer businesses in some areas, say on the Lower East Side, for example. There's a sense in which when we think about budgets, you'd like to think that they budget kind of the way you budget. And at one time, California did that. So I mentioned that, back in the day when California was growing and California had to build hospitals and schools and electrical infrastructure and roads and water conveyance, and they needed them yesterday, and they got it done on 1/7 of the inflation-adjusted per capita budget. And so a big reason there is that was a time when Pat Brown was governor. He was a Democrat. He worked with the Republican Legislative Assembly and State Senate. And there was very much an eye-to-eye, hey, we do this because what's right for the state. There was very much a cooperative partnership with the private sector and businesses. The discussions would be, well, what do you need? Okay, we need a road this way and we need a school here. Okay, well, then we're going to get that done. And they got it done. And can you imagine that in an environment where our high-speed rail, which we approved in 2008,
I didn't approve it.
God bless you, sir. I mean, it's a fantasy at this stage. And we look at we're looking at a state now that spends more on healthcare and welfare than it does on education and physical capital investments. And so that's just so you kind of wrap your mind, kind of wrap your head around those numbers and think, okay, there's a lot of opportunities there. I'll just give you one more example. In K through 12, we spend in this coming 26-27 fiscal year budget, we'll spend about $600,000 per classroom per year. $600,000 per classroom. We should be able to be providing a fantastic education at $600,000 per classroom. Only about 30% of our kids are proficient at federal standards, and it's not a super high bar. So there's a lot of places where I think if we externally impose some discipline and say, look, here's your budget, you got to make do with this, and we expect to hold you accountable for outcomes, then people will do that. But thus far, we haven't imposed that discipline, and we haven't really held the public sector as accountable as I would like. Certainly modulo the wonderful Santa Barbara city leaders we have here. I know Randy's here. But those are things that just have to change, and that just have to change immediately, because we are looking at a series of chronic budget deficits at the state level. California relies on super heavily on the state income tax and remarkably heavy on the top 1%. A couple of years ago, when the stock market boomed, California residents took capital gains, sold businesses. Anybody want to take a guess at how much California's top 1%, how many states' entire budgets could have been funded by the top 1%? I heard 20. Bill said all of them. Well, there is New York. Nearly, I think it was 38 or 39, just by the top 1%. And so when they're cashing in capital gains, the state's awash in tax revenue, and it gets spent. And then when the stock market goes down, they're not taking capital gains, and then there's a budget crisis. But the California state budget doesn't get reset back to that. So that's the reality we're looking at, and it's one that just absolutely has to change. But at the level of Santa Barbara, I think there's a lot we can do in terms of new business development and refurbishing old properties. And we have remarkable resources with UCSB and Cottage Health and the existing high-tech businesses here that I think if we just kind of let them create, I think Santa Barbara could just really take off really for everybody, and in an environmentally friendly way that leaves the area as beautiful as it is today.
Applause for that.
Yeah, I agree. So we're talking about the status quo, and I've written about this in my columns, but the status quo is not working. It used to work in California, used to work in Santa Barbara, but it's not now. And unfortunately for Santa Barbara County, poverty is the underlying issue, and actually the underlying issue in this entire conversation. What's frustrating is that we're not talking about a plague of some kind. It's too often man-made. We're responsible. So we talk about improving our personal finances and how what we can do to kind of change that trajectory as a community.
Well, we're pretty expensive as far as local governments go, and that's really not all a bad thing, because we get a high level of government services, and it's an expensive place to live, so we've got to pay our staff well. And I think this really just drives home the point. And we're also a high tax area in terms of sales tax, in terms of we have a big tourism industry. About 20% of our GDP comes from tourism. We have some remarkable properties, including Rosewood Miramar, and I remember as a not to date myself, but back in the day, in the late 70s and early 80s when I was a student here, I remember the Miramar just being almost a ghost hotel. And then when my family and I moved back here in 2013, I couldn't believe that the Miramar was still not built. I just kind of thought, that wouldn't have, there's something just very, very wrong with this. Everybody loses in that case. Environmentalists lose. The business community loses. People who want to visit here lose. We who live here lose as a beautiful property. So getting to the point where just getting stuff done that makes sense, that's a win-win, and there's a lot of win-win opportunities here in Santa Barbara. I mean, there's no, as you know, I'm preaching to the choir, there's no place like this. But if I'll just throw out one idea to those folks, the wonderful people we have who work in city and county government, we have some amazing businesses and academic practices in AI here, including UCSB. And the public sector, maybe not surprisingly, is not always the most nimble on their feet to adopt new technologies. I mean, oh my God, we lost over $30 billion in unemployment fraud during the pandemic. We lost so much money to unemployment fraud in the pandemic that we had to take out a loan from the federal government. We're the only state that took out a loan from the federal government to replenish our unemployment benefit reserves that hasn't repaid it yet.
Well, businesses are repaying it.
We have over $20 billion
every year for that.
And you know who pays it off? It's not like Uncle Sam is just going to say, okay, we'll cancel that student debt. Businesses, their unemployment tax rates go up. So our businesses are paying it back. But at the state government level, I think there's tremendous opportunities to create synergies with UCSB, City College, perhaps with the local high schools, bring kids in and say, hey, you know what? Here's something we're doing. Can you do it better? And despite the wonderful people we have working for us, AI is a remarkable thing. It's made enormous progress just in the last 2 years, even in the last 3 months. So I think those are areas where we can probably, get more from the same resources that we have right now.
Thank you. That's encouraging. So Ashley, what are the trends and problems that Lee outlined that applied to the Central Valley and other inland areas, and how did you address those challenges as mayor?
Picking up a couple of the things that have been put on the stage here. So I really want to zoom in on your downtown revitalization efforts. In Fresno, it was such a struggle because, again, remember, it's George Costanza opposite day over there in Fresno, a couple hills over. There are very few physical boundaries to our city. You have to go like 110 square miles. We're from our downtown, you're about 10 miles away before you hit a river. You got to go about 45 miles away before you hit mountains. I mean, it's a very vast area. And people who have made a lot of money and that generate sort of the local wealth, their business model is, going out to the periphery and expanding. And we have one of the, sprawlingest footprints of large cities in the U.S. So when you talk to your broader community about like, hey, how about that ghost town of a downtown that we have? It is very, very difficult to get people to see and feel and think that things could be different in their downtown. But I will tell you, our pedestrian mall, I want to pick up on this point. We put our pedestrian mall in, I want to say in 1964, I think it was 1964 in Fresno. It was one of the first pedestrian malls that went in the U.S. And the thinking back then was, as our cities across the U.S. sprawled after World War II, everyone was building their new suburban neighborhoods. We all had cars. Here we go out to the hinterlands. We had to compete somehow with the outlying areas. And so communities were doing this across the country, or one of the first to put it in. I think we're the second in the country to put it in. A couple of hundred cities put in pedestrian malls. Back in my day when I was at the city, at that point, our city had talked about taking out our pedestrian mall for 50 years. Now, let me ask you something. Is 50 years long enough to have a good, thorough discussion? I don't know. It seemed to me like at that time I was like 36 years old. I'm like, y'all have been talking about this since before I was
100 years from now, we're still talking about
100 years. Okay. So you rifle the 50-year record in Fresno. But within, I think it was about 6 years after that pedestrian mall went in, the property tax and the sales tax plummeted. It was clear that it was a failure. But we had hired a world-famous landscape architect, a guy named Victor Gruen, all respect to Victor Gruen, and it was the last intact landscape palette of his in the country. And so when we talked about changing it, I mean, you all talk about it's so nobody wants to change anything here. It's so beautiful. There are so many historic things. That's not true in a lot of ways in Fresno. It is true about our pedestrian mall. It was a really special thing that had been envisioned and created and loved by our, boomer parents and our World War II grandparents. And like they put so much into that, but it was clearly a failure. And so anyway, I used to always tell my Fresno colleagues, like, every other town has taken theirs out except for Santa Barbara and Santa Monica and a few others. But it's clear this thing needs to come out. And, when you take it out, things really pick up. And people would say in Fresno, oh, it's not going to work here. And I go, you guys, we're not that good at being bad. Like, we're so special. It works everywhere else, but it's not going to work here. This is our favorite Fresno thing. Like, oh, that's not going to apply to us because of all the reasons why we're so good at being bad. Anyway, long story short, we did end up taking out a pedestrian mall. It took 10 years to get this done. We ended up getting a federal grant to do it. And at the time, the Department of Transportation manager of this project said it was the most difficult physical infrastructure project she had seen in her time working for the US DOT because of all the historic issues and that sort of thing. But even during COVID, with the mall out, we saw sales tax go up, and based on cell phone data, visitors go up, and this is in the middle of the pandemic, and since then it's continued to come back. All this to say that is just one very clear example of it is really hard. We had public meeting after public meeting. We had design charrettes. We had people who were really committed to that architecture. And we came up with creative design solutions to really acknowledge and affirm what was beautiful and what was here. And we told the story of the mall all up and down the new Fulton Street, that sort of thing. Anyway, it seems to me that especially in a place like Santa Barbara that's very concerned about environmental impact, that you would in fact want to reuse your physical footprint and do that again and again and again and be as efficient as possible with what you've already built. And so what that suggests to me is that you should absolutely be redeeming your urban core and doing anything and everything you can to make the best use of that space as possible. It's good for everybody.
Thank you. So to KRISTEN, top that. How do we do that here?
I try not to answer the question of cars or no cars. But we are eloquent on the topic of downtown vitality, of creating a sense of place, of honoring our historic culture and core, and of activating a downtown with not only outdoor dining, but outdoor activities. We're very interested in preserving some part of a downtown plaza where we could have activations and a gathering square, like so many beautiful places in California have. But for us, again, the question that we're not talking about the right factors. We're not talking about a leasing strategy. We're not talking about incentives for business to start and to take over where an old business was and put something new there that has vertical marketing or that is connected to today's shopping trends. That we're not talking about incentivizing parades and activities and events and activities that cause people to feel like this is my home, this is our downtown. Did I top that?
No, well, you go. So Pete, in your work around California, have you seen other communities that have, managed to navigate those competing challenges to?
Yeah, I think one of the interesting slides, if you were following some of the data points that were flashed up here before we got on the stage, was just what I can only describe as an identity crisis for the state, which is to say that for 160 years, California has only done one thing, and that's grow. And for the first time in 160 years, that is stopping. Now, that has numerous implications, not just economic ones, which we're talking about here, but political ones. Most of the forecasts say that after the 2030 census, California is going to lose between 3 and 5 congressional seats. We are currently on a glide path for Texas to have a larger population than California by 2050. That means that whatever your political leanings are, we are nearing a place where it's going to be difficult to imagine in the current composition of the country politically, with people leaving blue states and going to red states. Certainly there will be some influence there by that politically. But that Texas is going to be the most powerful state politically in the country for as long as the eye can see, starting at around 2040. Now, that is not happening because California got any uglier or the weather got any worse. And God bless Texas, but it's Texas, man. You know, I think that's the thing that when we talk about some of these possible changes, and again, I talked about my experience in doing public engagement around the state and really change management being one of the most difficult things a community has to go through. Sometimes it's very easy in this moment to look at, well, people are going to this state and that state. You know, there are parts of California that are booming right now. From 2020 to 2025, Santa Barbara County lost 1.5% of its population. From 2020 to 2025, Riverside County grew by 5.5%. Placer County outside of Sacramento grew by 7.5%. There are parts of this state that are booming. Now, why are they booming? In part because some are creating for themselves much longer commutes to get into places like Sacramento, or Riverside, people commuting into Los Angeles. But the other thing that really is happening is that jobs are being created outside of these hubs. I was on a podcast today talking about a new study that we helped co-produce at Pepperdine, looking at the issues facing industrial jobs in Los Angeles County. And for a variety of reasons, Los Angeles County from 2020 to 2025 lost 150,000 people. And a lot of those people are what you might call demographically lower and middle class jobs. And a lot of those jobs were in industrial type manufacturing type positions that Los Angeles is zoning out of the region. We are over-regulating that industry out. And it's being done by people who ostensibly say that they care about people at the bottom rungs of the economic ladder. And so in so doing, the overregulation that's happening, the current stock of manufacturing and logistics zone properties were zoned back before 1990. And so I forget who was saying it before, maybe it was you, Ashley. We're kind of living off the fumes of it from a policy perspective, from a period in this state, I would argue between 1960 and 1995, maybe 2000, where policymakers, both at the state or local level, thought that economic growth was a good thing. And we don't have that right now. And I think we should, again, ask not just a question about why is this happening now, but what does Santa Barbara County look like 5 years from now on the current glide path? What does Los Angeles look like if we keep losing 200,000 people every 5 to 6 years? I mean, it's a phrase, but the future is in our hands right now. And I think this aspect that I often hear when I'm working with a community that's going through a difficult policy issue is, how do we do it? We know change has to happen, but we want to do it our way. And that actually is a great perspective. There needs to be a way of looking at change that is the Santa Barbara way of handling it. Not the Santa Monica way, not the Los Angeles County way, not the Ventura County way, but the Santa Barbara County way. And in that, I think understanding that the glide path we're on, I really think politically, economically, demographically, I will say this, as a state, we are getting whiter, wealthier, and older. And that's the perception of California that I've always thought, as again, somebody who didn't grow up here, but having a fourth generation, being married to a fourth generation Californian. The Brady Bunch really was a thing. Like that was a way of like families. The number one age demographic leaving the state of California in the last 10 years are Californians under the age of 18. Now, that doesn't mean that California's got a big runaway problem. It means that these are kids within families that are leaving the state. California is becoming less family friendly, less open to even though we always claim we're the most diverse state in the country, that may be because people are moving in internationally. But as far as kind of a homegrown diverse population, we are losing that by the day to Arizona, Texas, and Florida. And we're doing it to ourselves.
And can I just follow up one question or comment about that? You're very clear about this population shift, but I think here, and maybe in the whole state, but particularly here in the South Coast, Santa Barbara County, we have to look at those numbers as it relates to the workforce.
Yeah.
And so when we are thinking about maybe it'd be a good idea to grow jobs, tentatively, but how are we going to do that if we don't have the workforce to fill those jobs and then keep families here who we espouse to want to have a longstanding culture and have those histories and multi-generations.
Right. So I'm not saying this is, I know I'm going to get a lot of groans on this, but an amazing data point as it relates to how are the places that are booming around the state booming? 70% of the multifamily home construction in this state is happening in Riverside. 70%. Now, again, I'm not saying that people here are desirous of a lot of multifamily homes being built, but I will say for Riverside, they are making a decision to say we are all in for attracting people working at a particular level with particular jobs. Maybe they're mostly logistics. That's a huge boom area in that part of the state. But they are going to plan accordingly from a housing perspective to be able to support their growth that they're experiencing. And again, that set of policy decisions doesn't have to be Santa Barbara's. But again, as I said, the decisions that people are making, there are parts of the state that are growing. But the state as a whole has a very hard time with change. I just saw another data point, and again, this is probably going to get some groans. I saw a study by 2030, 1 out of every 4 Santa Barbarans is going to be 60 years or older. That's
Already there.
That's and I'm there this year. So
Listen.
I mean, I get it. Again, that kind of vision casting that we do so much in budget exercises with the public, not expecting them to know all the line items in a massive spreadsheet for the municipal budget, but just to step back and say, what are the decisions? What's the Santa Barbara that we want 5 years from now? Because those decisions that we're making now actually will create.
Yeah.
And I think you're laying out a framework of housing, workforce that gives us the picture that you all started with, which is how are our kids going to live here? How are we inspiring the next generation to vision themselves being welcome here and wanted here?
So I get really anxious when I feel stuck and that I can't move forward on the thing that is the positive thing I'm trying to go to. And what I both appreciate and also want to just kind of check for a second is like, the doom and gloom about California, it is I feel like it's pretty conclusive. So what do we do about that? What we do about that is actually make Santa Barbara the place we want it to be. And I'll repeat my point from earlier, living in a place in California that was never aided by quality decision making or better budgeting or being more austere and this and that. I mean, that has never been true for our region. We've always had to make our own way. And so I think places like Santa Barbara that have so much going for you, it's incredible. If in 20 years our downtown in Fresno looked like yours right now, I would die happy. Like, you have so much going for you. And I guess what? I don't want you to feel stuck, because here's the deal. If what we're talking about here tonight is making you be like, oh my God, it really is that bad, that is true. But you know what? The best way that you can make that not true is for you all to be together with your civic leaders and be like, damn Sacramento, we're doing what we want here. Nothing can stop us. That requires the most intense kinds of public participation in the civic arena that you've ever seen. In Fresno, we did the largest participatory budgeting exercise in the history of the U.S. 529 people stayed together for 3 months to decide how to appropriate $140 million. And at the end of the process, when people voted, the citizens voted on what they wanted and the recommendations went to the city council, it was a near unanimous decision with one person voting opposed to the package of spending and everybody else being in agreement, because the process really matters. And government has to be good at it, but government also is not the only solution here. The civic sector can and should be responding, reacting, leading it. And I say this as a former mayor, and I loved being a mayor. I would never be one again, but I love being a mayor. And let me tell you that, and I would say this as mayor, it should never be the case that it matters so much who our elected officials are that we're hanging on every election decision. That's a fail for the broader community, and that is up to us. We don't have to wait for the perfect collection of people to be in elected office. We take responsibility. We create public processes. We decide what our priorities are. We partner with our government. We partner with our private sector, our educational institutions, but we don't let anybody tell us what we're going to be. We decide that ourselves, and we make it happen. That's how we make California better. Starts right here.
Wow.
Woo!
Amen. I'm not sure I can top that. I think we have a couple more minutes, but I think that actually is the perfect note to end on. Noozhawk's in. If we're going to do a civic engagement project, we would more than be happy to participate in that. And I think we did one, 15 years ago with Pepperdine, actually. And I'd like to think we're a little smarter about it now. But we would be totally interested in that. Yep. And if we could even beat Fresno. What was the number? 529?
We had 529 people who stayed together to decide how we were going to appropriate $70 million in grant funding from the state, $70 million matched by local government. And this is in the 3 census tracts in California that are the lowest income and most polluted in all of the state are in Southwest Fresno. And we had to decide how we're going to spend $140 million to try to make that different. And it was an incredible process. We ended up with the community college being funded. We ended up with street front improvements, street trees, a public plaza, all this kind of stuff. But all this to say, we'll meet you in Paso Robles. How about that?
Okay.
And it will solve the problems in Paso.
Just as long as it's not Kettleman City.
We'll get past Kettleman and over to Paso.
Okay. I think I'm going to end there because I don't think we need to top that. But I will say thank you to the panel for doing this together. It was very inspiring to me. I hope it was useful for you all too. And thank you for coming. I'm going to have invite Brian back out to just go over the logistics for outside. But again, thank you to our panelists, all of you, for giving your time this evening. We really appreciate it. And thank you to our sponsors. Brian.
Well, my last column for Noozhawk, I asked the question, which was, where have all the problem solvers gone? And I think we found them. How about a big round of applause for our panel tonight? I don't know about you, but I learned a lot. I took a few notes, but I think the thing that stood out to me the most was that we picked the wrong title for tonight's event. We should have just called it Screw Sacramento, and I think we would have gotten a lot of participation. Beyond that, it picked up a couple other themes in the panel's remarks that I wanted to share, and I think would be worth exploring on the Esplanade after. First is that many of the challenges we face here in Santa Barbara boil down to a difficulty with cost-benefit analysis. We overstate the benefits of many policy choices and discount their costs. This makes it difficult to implement sensible policies at the outset, or as our panel was discussing earlier, reform or discard policies that are no longer working as intended. Second, the solutions to most of our problems: reduce regulatory burdens, grow your tax base. I know this is shocking. Don't require new money, which is a good thing because we don't have any. But they do require seriousness of purpose and an actual set of strategies. Now, we may not have much of those either right now, but as Dan Walter suggested in February, we can all work together and encourage our elected officials to be sensible and strategic problem solvers. And I'm encouraged by the fact that we do have a few problem solvers here tonight, both elected officials and candidates for office. I didn't see everyone on the Esplanade, so if I don't mention you by name, I apologize. But I do know that Mayor Rouse is here tonight. Thank you, Randy, for being here tonight. I know Eric Friedman, who is running for mayor, is here tonight. Kelly McAdoo, who I had the pleasure of meeting at the last event, is also here tonight. Thank you, Kelly, for being here. I did not get to see her on the Esplanade, but I was told that our former mayor, Helene Schneider, was here tonight. Thank you for being here, Helene. And Monty Wilson, a good friend who's running for city council, is also here tonight. So I'm encouraged that they're here, right? Their willingness to participate in this community conversation reflects their commitment to intellectual curiosity, civility, and civic engagement. It gives me hope. Hope it gives you hope as well, that we can do the things that the panel talked about for the last 80 minutes or so. So what's coming up at Spotlight? Well, we're hosting another critical conversation here at the Lobero on October 8th. We're going to get that up there right now. There it is. We are thrilled to be welcoming Greg Lukianoff here for a wide-ranging and serious discussion. He's going to talk with us about how we address the cultural phenomena that created the anxious generation and cancel culture. He's going to talk about the importance of free speech to democracy, good government, and scientific inquiry. And then we're going to talk about how we respond to the threats to free speech on college campuses and at every level of government. And there are many, they're widespread, and they cut across both parties. So please, please, please join us here on October 8th for the event with Greg. Tickets are on sale now. There will also be a post-event reception and book signing, and you can buy the tickets for that as well through the Lobero box office. Or if you're way more technically savvy than I am, you can use the QR code on the slide and do it here tonight. Please also save the night of November 17th for Spotlight. We'll be back here at the Lobero Theatre to discuss the November elections with Mara Liasson, the senior national political correspondent for NPR and regular contributor to Fox News. We're thrilled to have her coming to Santa Barbara. Tickets will go on sale for that in the next few weeks. You won't want to miss that either. Bill alluded to this earlier, but I'm just going to say it again. As you might imagine, it's pretty difficult to produce events of this caliber. Indeed, had Jeff and I known what we were signing up for when we came up with this idea over beers at the Nugget last October, we might never have taken the plunge and actually started Spotlight Santa Barbara. But I'm glad we did, and I hope you are too. But to make it a sustained success, we need your help. We've got to build the Spotlight community. So I have 4 asks for you before you leave tonight. 1, please do buy tickets to the last 2 events of the year. 2nd, ask your friends to do the same. 3rd, when you see an article about us, share it. The best publicity is your telling friends and family and others that you liked an event here and recommend it to others. 4th, if you're interested in sponsoring an event or the series as a whole, reach out to me or Jeff via LinkedIn or the Spotlight Santa Barbara website, or grab Bill at Noozhawk. Without sponsors, we simply could not make this speaker series possible. And on that note, I'd like to just thank our sponsors for tonight one more time. We couldn't have done it without them. So thank you very, very much. We really appreciate their support for our fledgling series. And thank you again for being here tonight. I hope to see you all on the Esplanade in a few minutes, and again at our October 8th and November 17th events. Have a wonderful night. Good night.
There was a time we trusted words, believed they mattered, believed they stirred something deeper than the noise, something human in the choice to sit, to live.